Hello, ILTA community, and welcome to this ILTA Voices episode. ILTA just in time when big AI comes to legal. I'm Paul Giedraitis, CEO of Orgaimi, and I'm joined by my two guests, Patrick DiDomenico, founder and CEO of Legaltech Connect, and Nikki Shaver, CEO and co-founder of Legaltech Hub. Excited to have you guys here today.
Thank
Thank you.
you so much, Paul.
Thank you,
All
Paul.
right, I'll hand it over to y'all.
Amazing. Well, Patrick, it's fun to be here with you today.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this one. It's gonna be great.
Same. And viewers may not know this, but literally just before this recording started, Patrick coined the phrase big AI to refer to big tech companies that are really big AI companies. So we really want to talk about what it means for the legal industry to have these companies moving into legal. They've always been available, obviously, to the legal industry like they are to the general public. But Patrick, what do you think about, big AI? We've seen Anthropic release Claude for Legal. We've seen OpenAI hire someone for the legal vertical. Obviously, Microsoft is focusing once again on legal with its legal agent, and a number of other kind of murmurs about other big AI companies coming in, Perplexity with Computer for Counsel. Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing for the industry at large?
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways it's irrelevant whether it's good or bad because it's definitely happening, right?
Yeah.
And I do think it's a good thing, of course. These technologies are, absolutely transformative for every industry and certainly legal. And you and I have been doing this a long time. We have been beating this drum for a long time, trying to get our colleagues and coworkers at law firms and elsewhere to adopt technology in general, right? And it has used to be like pulling teeth. I mean, I could tell you stories about, you know, sitting around conference room tables debating with 10 different people for three different meetings to buy a $20,000 piece of software. We spent way more than that multiple times over debating whether to do this. And, law firms are notoriously slow and overanalyze those types of things. You could have purchased that software and thrown it away, and we'd be better off, right, than spending countless hours debating this. What I find is interesting is there's not a lot of debate now. It's, as you know, probably better than others, Nikki. You know, now it's law firms basically throwing money at these and other companies because they've either feel like they have to keep up client demand and lots of other reasons that I'm sure we'll get into today. So, again, I'm not sure it's good or bad, but it's going to happen regardless. But I do think it's a positive thing for the industry at the end of the day. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think I really like the way you put that. It is transformative technology. And in reality, we've all been using it now since ChatGPT came out in one form or another. So it doesn't matter so much, really, whether the front is the interface provided by the Frontier Model Lab company or whether it is a front provided by a legal application. I mean, that matters for the provider. It matters less for the entity using it. It just needs to work the way that we need to work. We need it to work. So I mean, thinking about it, like, what do you think when that moment of the Claude for Legal release, actually, it's been like a staged kind of entry, really, by Anthropic into the market. Did you feel like that was a serious moment? Like, do you actually think that there is a serious intent to make these products work for the legal industry in the same way, say, a Harvey or Legora intends for
Mm.
their products to work for the industry?
Yeah. I mean, this is another sort of history repeating itself in some ways. And I'm sure we'll get into some of these details. But so if we just sort of take a look back at what we've seen in the relative recent history around Claude and or Anthropic with Claude, OpenAI, Perplexity, as we talked about, but we'll get into more details. So it wasn't very long ago, uh, you know, uh, with Claude, it sort of kicked off and by the way, there's a great webinar from our friend Bob Ambrogi. He interviewed Mark Pike at Anthropic. Mark is the AGC at Anthropic, who basically came up with this whole sort of focus on Claude for legal. So they, back in December 2025, which seems like ages ago, Mark did a blog post, I think it was, about how Anthropic uses Claude legal for, in their legal department. And this got a ton of attention and really kicked things off. And I remember Mark in the podcast talked about how they were doing that. And then he basically thought, hey, I wonder if this can turn into a product that we can, offer to our clients. So that was the birth essentially of Claude legal skills, I think was the first iteration. But before that, and I think very, very important, was the launch of Claude Co-work, right? The installed application on your PC. First, it was Mac only, and then it was Windows as well later on. I think this is in January and February of this year is when Claude Co-work came out. And that's a big deal because it's not just a browser-based chat, right? Now it can control your computer, can do various things and get into real actual agentic type work, right? As opposed to just sort of the question answer type stuff. But then that led on the legal side, again, from Mark Pike's work, the Claude legal skills, right? These are the plugins. And many people probably remember this because this created ripple effects through the legal tech economy, right? So this is back in early February, if I recall correctly. And you'll remember, and I think you and others on your team have written some great things around a lot of this. Even in the news, I remember on CNBC they were calling it the SaaSpocalypse, right? This panic around this. The stock prices of many of the companies or holding companies that own the big legal tech, Lexis, Westlaw, Thomson Reuters, Zoom, Wolters Kluwer, they dropped by double-digit percentages that day. And I think most of them have recovered since then, but that was a big deal. People were panicking in the industry, right? So, and that was basically just the announcement of those plugins that you could use through Claude Co-work. And I think there were 11 when it launched, something like that. So they actually focused on a lot of different legal, not legal, knowledge work, but legal also. So it included a bunch of skills, I think nine skills to start with, compliance checkers, brief checkers, reviewing contract review, NDA triage, these types of things. And basically these plugins are kind of like little prompts, right? You select the plugin and it will prompt I wrote down the contract review plugin. Review contracts against your organization's negotiation playbook, flagging deviations from and generating red line suggestions. So these types of little prompts or plugins are what they launched. And then the really big one, of course, was in May now, I think it was mid-May-ish, was Claude for Legal, right? So this is the big step into in legal. So they're not just saying we're going to give you some plugins. They announced this, I think, real step in. And by the way, your colleague Stephanie Wilkins wrote a fantastic article outlining all of this with a really great infographic. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. I think that was published on May 12th. So Stephanie's article is really fantastic. It'll give you a fantastic overview of it with these 12 practice areas that they put out. And importantly, I think 20 plus traditional legal providers allowing their data and information to be displayed and queried and interacted with through Claude, through their MCP, Model Context Protocol connector, essentially. So that's the big deal, right? So
Right.
that really kicked all this off. And again, Nikki, I know you're very versed in this. you've published a lot about it, you've talked a lot about it and spoken a lot about it. So you probably have even more insights into some of that stuff.
Well, no, I think you've laid that out very well. And it was kind of a fascinating ramp up. And obviously, as you said, the co-work was kind of the first step in terms of making this really meaningful for firms who, even back then, started really playing with Anthropic's Claude co-work, because having that kind of agentic capability, especially for firms that already had the enterprise model,
Yeah.
was intriguing and allowed them to do a lot of things that they hadn't done before. I took a slightly cynical approach when Claude for Legal launched, because if you look back at what Anthropic had been doing in other markets, since about February last year, they've been launching a series of different Claude 4s in various industries. Claude for Health, for example, Claude for Finance, and so on. And this was the latest iteration of that. So certainly wasn't out of the blue. Um, and then, of course, very promptly after launching this, Anthropic filed for IPO.
Right.
And so it is an interesting question as to whether that was part of their strategy to increase valuation in the lead up to IPO, especially when you look at the weight behind something like Claude for Legal, which is perhaps questionable. Mark Pike, I think, has done a phenomenal job of building something that is really interesting for legal market players, especially those perhaps who are not using it at a large enterprise level, because it gives them tools that they wouldn't otherwise have had. But of course, he has a day job as assistant GC of Anthropic, not a small day job, I imagine, and has said himself that this is kind of a side of desk thing for him rather than his real focus. And any significant product that you would see larger firms buying into at an enterprise level, you would expect there to be an actual product lead who can give full time to it, as well as customer support. And a lot of firms are having real trouble getting anyone from Anthropic on a call to discuss, token increases or costs and negotiate costs, or to get customer support of any kind, let alone some of the security issues that arise as well. So in order to really play in that deep end of the market as a product company, I think you do need to think about, does Anthropic have to have lawyers and subject matter expertise and make customer service and support available? Law firms have become much more rigorous and also much more demanding of their providers in the last few years, where previously they would have taken on most of the adoption and change management around a product themselves. They're now often asking their providers to come in with forward deployed legal engineers essentially to support adoption on the ground. Anthropic is so far removed from that. You can't even reach them on a call, let alone rely on them for adoption. But I do, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I mean, I do think it's notable. I mean, the reality is, this series of entries into legal is indicative of large AI companies taking the legal vertical seriously and recognizing it as a market that is worth dedicating some resources to. And for all kinds of firms and corporate legal departments that are interested in building and using the frontier models themselves rather than relying on third-party AI providers in the legal industry specifically, it's a really interesting tool if you look at it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, two things stand out to me in that respect. And again, you and I have been around for a long time. We've seen echoes of this over the years. I mean, how many times did Microsoft say we're going to dedicate, right, to legal, and we're going to finally, really build some things that are specific to you and really support you. No disrespect to Microsoft, fantastic company. But then they'd pull that back and sort of nothing happened. So there's a history of that. And look, at the end of the day, we understand, legal is a relatively small market, right? As important as it is to us, it's relatively small, right? The largest law firm is, maybe a medium-sized business. Most of them are small businesses, essentially, right? Um, uh, these companies need to do what they need to do to survive and thrive, of course. But on the sort of flip side of that, I think it's from the AI perspective, Claude and OpenAI and others. I think it's a good way to test the waters, right? Put a few things out, and with the rapid pace of, how rapidly these companies in particular are able to do what they're doing, it's a good way to test things out. And if the reaction is as it has been, which is very positive for the most part, then they can say, okay, well, how about this? A little bit more. And they can say, how about a little bit more? But then if it
Mm.
doesn't work out, they can always retract, right? So I like it. I like that approach. I don't have any insights into what they're actually doing, but it kind of seems that way to me. So
That's
anyway, I
very
think it's
interesting. Yeah, like it's di them dipping their toes in the water before
Mhm.
they delve a little deeper.
Yeah,
And I do think because we've heard murmurs of some of the other big tech players jumping into legal or about to, especially because MCP has made it much more feasible to do that. In other words, they don't need to necessarily build out a lot. They don't need their own data sets. They just need relationships and connectors to various data providers in the market and feature providers, frankly. It's been really interesting to me actually that so many of the legal AI application players are interested in working with some of the big AI companies
yeah,
to provide connectors through MCP, especially when you look at things like document management systems and legal AI assistant providers and drafting providers. I think, if you think of the interface where you access features or access data as being contested ground, it's kind of giving up some of that contested ground and relying on the substance of their offering as what is valuable, regardless of where that is digested, which I think is a really fascinating development made feasible through MCP. And I do wonder whether we'll see more of that.
yeah. I agree. I think it's fascinating, and again, this sort of echoes back to the days where when we were in law firms, we would reach out to our then big tech companies and say, "Hey, we're paying you lots of money, and what we would like to do is through an API." Access the data so we can do other things with it. We can put it in our intranet or do this or that or the other thing with it. And there's always a very much reluctance to do that. And when some of them finally came around and said, okay, we can do that, but it's going to cost you X, right? We're going to charge you for that. Um, you know, accessing data through an MCP is sort of similar. I've also heard it is sort of equated to MCP is like the USB for
Right.
AI, right?
Yeah.
But similar also to APIs. Yeah, basically to your point, getting the data from the provider, whatever data that is, into the interface of whether it's Claude or OpenAI or Perplexity. Um, you know, that really struck me when I saw a demo from one of the relatively new providers, and I'm showing it to me, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, this looks a lot like Claude Cowork. That's interesting that you chose that interface. And it's like, no, this is Claude Cowork. We have our own
Amazing.
interface, but most of our customers, I don't know if you said most, but a lot of our customers just access our data and our information through Claude Cowork. And I thought that was fascinating. But also having the option to do either or is, I think, important personally. But it is a very interesting twist on things, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure
It
you're seeing a
really
lot of that
is.
as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's like we've ceased hanging on to that as the be all or end all, and it's much more, if you think about it, it's a much more customer centric perspective. The customer gets to choose what they are going to use as their interface. And the reality is, for a lot of customers, that's going to be what people are used to using in their day-to-day life anyway. which is the interface provided by a lot of these frontier lab companies. I also just occurred to me as you were speaking, Patrick, one of the reasons I think that we're seeing this flourishing of the MCP environment and enterprise versions of frontier models being really attractive to law firms is because in the last 3 years, we've seen law firms really ramp up on the talent side,
Mm,
their AI skills and their developer skills, because they've had to in order to understand this technology and really get to grips with it. And perhaps that has also led to not just an understanding that R&D now is really critical in law firms, as it has been in most businesses for a long time, but also that they can build alongside any third party kind of renting of solutions. And perhaps actually by renting solutions, they're able to see what is useful and then build some version of that themselves using whatever enterprise models they have access to combined with an MCP environment of their preferred data sources. So it allows for almost a customization of a full offering rather than having to rely on one provider for that full offering.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. This is one of the more fascinating things I think. And you know, another part of that is when I don't know, it was early on. What was it? OpenAI was ChatGPT was November 2022. So early in 2023, people are getting nervous, right? Is this gonna kill knowledge management, for example, right?
Right. I think you and I were both in a session where that was said.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And I was so appalled by that suggestion that I actually wrote an article for law.com about it. Basically, AI is going to supercharge knowledge management, not
Right.
kill it. It's going to have the exact opposite. And I think that's proving to be true. And I think, in defense of the people who have said that, I don't think what they meant was it's going to kill KM because, KM is not a tool or, we know that it's not, we know what it is, and it's not just another tool. I think what they were saying was it's going to kill some specific applications that were associated with KM. So, but, what I've seen and you've seen, um, not only has it increased the amount of work that the existing knowledge management innovation folks are doing, everyone I talk to is working harder than ever, including myself. And I'm not even a law firm anymore. But the folks inside law firms are just, working their butts off. And the number of new, to your point earlier, the number of new roles at law firms and the levels and the salaries, I haven't seen this many and so many and so high levels in, quite frankly, ever. I think this is the peak that I've seen, um, and it's so that's reassuring. But it's also to your point about the ability to do things with this, right? So first of all, these tools are much more, I guess maybe they're configurable than custom. I don't know if
Mm,
I don't know if the difference between configuration and customization is that important anymore. But I guess what I'm saying is you don't have to be a hardcore technologist, right? You don't have to, right?
right.
There's vibe. We have vibe coding now. Not that these folks are vibe coding, but these tools are much easier to deal with. They're much easier to mold and shape as you need them, right? To provide your lawyers and others with just what they're looking for. So it's easier to deal with, more accessible, much more powerful. So all of these things sort of combine to really, I think, increase the amount of adoption, desire, right? And then, of course, not to go too far down this road, because I'm sure we'll get to more of this, but clients are doing the same thing. In-house legal
Right.
departments are doing the same thing, and that's driving more demand for adopting these innovations in law firms. It's kind of like this virtuous cycle, which is great. So fascinating times, right?
It really is. And you're so right. Everyone I know is actually frankly exhausted and
Yes.
overworked and burnt out at this point. But at the same time, it's such an exciting moment
Yes.
for us in our industry. Interesting to me what you said about clients, and I do think between 24 and 25, end of 25, we saw the use or adoption of AI by corporate legal double, and then again from end of 25 to where we are in 26, double again.
Mm,
And obviously, as their sophistication with AI increases, the demands that they will have of their law firms also will change substantially.
yeah.
Also, by the way, their understanding of what is possible on the law firm side will change. It's no longer, I think, going to be feasible for law firms to say, no, we're deciding not to automate that work. Clients will know what you are doing for us is able to be automated with AI. It should be turned around faster. We should be having discussions around fees. I think more demand will come there. But something interesting in the lead up to this discussion is that you and I were talking about whether we're now seeing already clients asking for AI ready, or someone had said Claude ready output. In other words, for their law firms to change the way and the format in which they deliver advice, putting it into something that is immediately able just to be put straight into an AI solution. And as part of that, we went out to LinkedIn and we actually asked, have you experienced clients asking for AI ready output as part of legal deliverables? Or as a client, have you asked for AI ready output? I think both of us expected that the answer would overwhelmingly be no. And indeed, 42% of respondents said no, and another 25% said, what would that even look like? Which is, I would say, a hard no. But
Mm,
33% answered yes. And this was 83 votes, so it's not a huge, margin of the market, but it is an interesting indicator that we're starting to see clients ask for a shift in the way that legal advice is delivered and an understanding that, we're all working in these tools.
yeah, absolutely. And I agree. What does that mean? What does, Claude, AI ready or Claude ready mean? Um, when we first started thinking about this topic, I thought to myself, in some ways, I have this expression I use all the time, old problems, new tools, right? Same problems, new tool, old problems, new tools. And what I mean by that is the nature of most work, unless you're in technology or developing AI, which is obviously new, but the nature of most work, certainly legal, the goal is the same, right? You're litigating a case, you're doing a deal, whatever it is you're doing. The legal profession and certainly the courts and the regulatory bodies and others, they certainly haven't caught up to the technology of today. They haven't caught up to the technology of yesterday, essentially. So the output, what needs to be done, the work that needs to be delivered or done hasn't changed. The way we do it and the speed with which we do it, and hopefully the quality increases as well. These things have changed and they enable us to do things in different ways. But at the end of the day, you know, to finalize a merger or an acquisition, or to try a case or resolve a dispute, in some way, shape, or form, that's done in a traditional way, right? The final product. But again, the way we do it can be better, stronger, faster, more better and more stronger and more faster than ever before, which is the fascinating part, I think.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I do think that maybe the traditional way that we do things, not just the deliverable, but the actual fundamental approach may change over time. But I totally agree. The outcome that we seek is the same. And if you look back historically, the way that deliverables are provided has shifted over time again and again. So it's no
Yeah.
surprise. But I do think for firms that are not yet in a position to be able to offer that kind of new form of deliverable, or talk to clients in ways that indicate that the firm is at least on the same level from a sophistication
Yeah.
perspective with AI as the client, they will suffer because we're now there. I think we're at this point where clients are starting to ask, not just for, we've spoken so much about pricing and what that means, but that's not all it's about. It's also about the way that clients will expect to be interacted with and the format in which they expect to receive legal advice and other kinds of legal deliverables. So yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating times.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
not the least of this is, there's a bit of an arms race among law firms too, right?
Right.
Everyone's putting out the press releases and everything else, which I love to see because that means the law firms are taking this seriously. I remember times when we were doing what we were doing at various law firms, and there's a lot of innovation theater going on. But now law firms are taking this very, very seriously, and they don't just want to be appear or be seen as innovative. They realize we should actually be innovative and actually do these things better, stronger, faster because our clients want it and it's the right thing to do, and we can make a lot of money doing it. So yeah, great. I love it. It's great. Even though it's exhausting, as you said, it's a really fascinating and a great time to be in legal tech.
It is. And Paul, we will hand over to you in a second. I do think that there is still some innovation theater. And I expect that increasing client demands will gradually change that as well. I think it's in our nature
Yeah.
for people to market and promote, but I think I've seen enough announcements about this firm has signed a contract. That's not to me
Yeah.
innovative. I
Right.
think we can
Yes.
move on into more concrete
Yes.
differentiation in the market.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Great
Well,
point.
thank you, Patrick. Very
Thank
interesting
you.
discussion.
Yeah. Fascinating. Thank you.
Well, Patrick, DiDomenico, and Nikki Shaver, thank you so very much for such an incredibly exciting and insightful discussion about all the exciting things happening within the legal tech industry. So thanks so much. Thanks, ILTA listeners, for tuning in to When Big AI Comes to Legal, our session today. Look forward to a lot of great programming coming out soon. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.